Hey there, Thomas from Bricks here. In today's video, we are going to take a deep dive into the container element. And the container element is available since Bricks 1.2, and it replaces our old section, row, and column layout. And the problem with this old layout approach was twofold. The first reason being it was very inflexible. You could not create more complex layout. If you want something more than just a section with some rows and columns inside of it, you are basically out of luck. You could not simply add a column within a column. That was just not possible. And the second reason being it's HTML bloat. So because we relied on this really rigid concept of sections, rows, and columns, oftentimes all you needed was just a simple container where you put in your heading. But yeah, working with this fixed layout of having a section and then a row inside of it and then a column inside of it, when you actually don't need any columns and rows in that case, created a lot of bloat, which means your page size increased and also possibly this have hurt your search rankings slightly. With the new container element, it's very easy to align a container itself, but also the elements inside of your container. You can nest containers within containers as deep as you want. If you want to go 5 levels deep because you have a really complex structure, that's very easy and possible with this new container element. Also, you don't create any additional bloat. There might be 1 or 2 more clicks that you might perform in the beginning when you, for example, want to create a column, but this ensures that you only create the structure that is really necessary for the certain section, for the certain element, for this one container, and nothing else that's not necessary. All right, without further ado, I think we just start off by adding our first container. Also new in Bricks 1.2 is the ability to just click on an element to add it to the canvas. So I can just click on my container here, and you can now see it's right on my canvas. My structure updated as well. Later on, once you have a few containers on your canvas, you might want to position it between 2 containers. Then you can just take your container, you drag it, you drop it, and you position it just like that. But in order to get started in the simplest way possible, we're just going to start with this one container. Also new in Bricks 1.2 is the ability to just click on the container itself. So previously you always need to find this little pencil icon. Now you can just click on your container and start editing it. And we start, I think, just at the very top with the first setting that we see here, which is the HTML tag. So you can see by default we use div elements. So this container is nothing more than a div, okay? But if you want to change this up, for example, if you want to, for semantic reasons, want to have this as a section, you would just select section. If the tag is not available in this list, you can just select custom and then just put in your custom HTML tag, just like that. I'm going to stick with my section here. Next up, we have our display settings. So you can see by default we use the CSS Flexbox. And this also allows us to use all of those controls here, those visual controls, to really easily align our container itself and also the elements inside of our container. Also an opportunity here to set the gap between our elements inside of here very easily. We can change the order of this container. If there are more containers down here, very easy just by setting this number. Gonna do this later on as well. But yeah, we use CSS Flexbox here. And if you're new to it, you can just click around and play around with it, how it works. I don't think really that you need to read this article, but if you're just curious and just want to get a really good and proper understanding how this Flexbox layout works, I would recommend you to go over this complete guide to Flexbox from CSS Tricks. So if you go to Google, just put in CSS Flexbox. This one should definitely show up on the first page. And it's not just a bunch of text. You can see here there's there are a lot of illustrations here explaining the directions, which we have as a setting in Bricks. The wrapping, it explains here as well. Justify content, how you align items, all written down here. Okay. So yeah, Flexbox, that's what we use by default. If you see this list and you're wondering where is CSS Grid, it's not part of Bricks 1.2, but we definitely plan on adding this at a later point. But we get started with Flexbox. You have already so many possibilities just by using CSS Flexbox. If you want to hide a container and all of the elements inside of your container, you can select Display None. Previously also those elements were still visible in Bricks, now they are really hidden. And they're only hidden to the human eye. They are still part of your HTML structure. You can see inside our structure we still have our container element here, and we also have this little eye icon indicator telling us that this container element is hidden. If I want to bring it back up, I can just click this eye icon to toggle the visibility and the display, and now we are back to our Flexbox layout. Okay, so the first Flex property that we have is the direction, and by default all of the elements inside of this container are aligned vertical, which means from top to bottom. And I think we should illustrate this just by adding maybe a heading and a button. And the way to do this is first to select your container, which we already did, we're already working with it, and then we head to our elements panel, and then you can just click on the elements that you want to add inside of your container. So in our case, we're going to add a heading and a button, and you can also drag and drop elements inside of this container. So if I want to add this icon, I can just take it here, I drop it, and now you see here it's in between my heading and my button. You can also move it inside of your structure. So if I want to move my icon down below, I can just take it like this, drop it, and now you see I adjusted it this way as well. Sometimes working with the drag and drop on the canvas can be a bit finicky, especially if you have like smaller icons, elements. So you always have the structure to arrange your elements via drag and drop as well. Okay, let's remove our icon here. I don't want to have this one, and head back to our container settings, and let's just change our direction here. So vertical, top to bottom. If I want to show this in a horizontal fashion, I just select horizontal, and now they show up in a horizontal line. The wrapping, by default, it's set to no wrap. I can illustrate this just by adding a bit more text here. You can see now everything is trying to fit onto the same line. Okay, well, usually I would not probably have such long words, I would have a space here somewhere. Because my direction is set to horizontal and I don't want any wrap, as soon as this heading takes up all of the available space, the line break basically occurs here in that case. Okay, if I would set this to wrap, you can now see once it takes up the space and the button doesn't have enough space next to it, it will wrap onto the next line. And this is basically how the wrap setting works. Let's undo those two to have a look at the alignment of the container itself. You can use this first here. First setting, align self, and you can see this also really visual controls, giving a quick and easy way to also like preview and see it, to know what you're going to edit. So in this case, I know, okay, if I click this setting here, I'm going to align my container on the left-hand side or centered, or at the end, in that case, on the right-hand side. If you want to have a full width section, for example, you would use this stretch here. Okay, you can see now my container takes up the entire horizontal width. If I would hide my structure, you can see now it still takes up all the available space. Let me undo this and let me show you the alignment options here. So align items and justify contents allow us to align our flex items. So in that case, like our container is our flex container and our elements inside of this container are the flex items. Okay. If I want to align my elements centered, so what I need to do here, I just need to select center. And if my container would be a bit higher, so let me just quickly increase the height of my container by clicking on it and maybe switching our unit to viewport height. I'm going to resize my container. Now you can see I have this new height here, which also shows up here. I can now also change the alignment along my main axis. So because you can see our direction is set to vertical, if I set this justify content to centered, it's going to be centered along this vertical main axis. This align items is the alignment along the cross axis, which is the horizontal axis in this case. If you flip this and you change this to horizontal, so if I change direction to horizontal, you will see that the icons will also update as well. See that? This way also giving you a much easier indication of what you're going to edit. Okay, we're going to stick with vertical, and we are down here at our gap. So this is a really easy way to create a gap between your elements, between each and every element. So if I want to have a gap here between my heading and my bottom, what I can of course do, I can just change the margin of my heading, or I can just use this gap here. So if I want to set this, for example, to 20 pixel, I would just type 20, and now I have a gap between those two of 20 pixel. Problem being, although this is really easy, and especially when you create a column layout, really easy way to adjust this gap, the browser support currently is only sitting at 70%. We can click this little link here to have a look. So now we have our row gap here, and you can see the global browser support is at 70% currently. Obviously, Internet Explorer is not supported, which is not too much of a problem considering the global usage right now of a total of around 1%. So that one we can ignore most likely anyway. There's support in Microsoft Edge, Firefox, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera. And yeah, that's the biggie here right now. Safari and Chrome for iOS is not supported in version 14.4, but the latest version, which has just been released end of April, I think it's gonna definitely gain percentages. So over time, this value should increase as well as people start updating to the latest browser version here for Safari and Chrome on iOS. Back to our container. So this is how we can set our gap. We can also use this order property in order to just change this number without actually having to reorder our elements here. So this also works between different breakpoints. I'm going to show you this right now. Let's just maybe add another container. So I click on my container, and if I would, so basically the lower the number, the lowest number shows up first. Let's just put it like this. So by default, the order of every container is 0. So if I would set this to -1, this container should show up above my main container here. Okay, so I'm going to set this to -1, and now you can see this container shows up above this container here, which has an order of 0. If I would set this to -1 or -2, it would show up above this container. So this is a really easy way to adjust the order just by using this setting here. Remove this container, and let's go back to our main container. This is basically everything in terms of setting. There isn't much more to it. What I can show you also in terms of alignment options is the alignment of elements that are not containers. So for example, if I want to align all of my elements in here, centered, which we've already done, but then maybe I decide there's one element that I want to align independent from the rest of the elements. I can just edit my heading. In this case, this works with any other non-container element as well. Then I go to layout, and then I have this alignment option here. So if I want to have everything centered except for this heading, I could say I want to have the heading on the left, at the end, centered or stretched. I can also change the order. So again, like the container itself, we can also use this integer number here to quickly change our orders. If I would increase this to 1, it would now show below my button to the visitor. The structure itself hasn't changed. This is just via pure CSS. Okay. That's the getting started example, basically. What I definitely want to show you next is how we can create a multi-column layout, because that's something you probably need in almost all of your projects. So we're gonna quickly, let's just remove our button and our element. Oh no, actually I'm gonna remove everything. I want to show you like different ways how you can accomplish this. So how do we create a multi-column layout? Well, it's actually very similar to the layout we just created. We start off with our container, and instead of adding a heading and a button, we simply add 3 containers inside of this container, and each container will be one of our columns. So I can just click on the container element 3 times. This will be my first column, second column, third column. Of course, by default, our containers are aligned vertically, so all we need to do is just to go to our main container here and change our direction to horizontal, and I now have my 3-column layout. What you can also do, if it helps, you can also rename those labels here, so you can just call this column 1, column 2, and column 3. You can also now see the name is updated here. So this is my column, second column, and my third column, if this helps you. And then we can continue with the next step. Normally you would like to add a gap between your columns, so let's just do that next. But in order to illustrate this better, I'm gonna set a background color for each column here. So I go to background, select my color, a light gray. It's my first one. I can right click here, copy my style, right click here, paste it. Same for our last column, just like that. I have 3 columns with a background color. Now we can go to our container and we can set our column gap. So I can just put in 20 here, and now you can see I have a gap between my columns, not outside, but it's just inside this gap of 20 pixels. The problem with this solution is, like I said before, the browser support here is at 70%. So personally, I would, instead of using this column gap, you can also just go to this column here in the center and just adjust the margin of it. So I'm going to set this to 30 pixels. You know that we can do this visually here. So I'm going to set it to 30, just like that, using the margin setting. You can see here, margin right is at 30, margin left is at 30. You can adjust this to your liking, of course. And just like that, I have my 3-column layout. Now I also want to show you how we can work with those columns independently. I think it's best if I would just add an element inside of each column to show you this. So you can see by default, the height of my column depends on the height that the elements inside of each column take up. So you can see, because my icon is the largest element here, it takes up more space than my heading and more space as my button as well. We can stretch this, of course. So if I go to my container, you know, we can align our items inside of it. So which means our column 1, column 2, and column 3. So if I stretch them, you can now see they take up all of the available space here. If I change the height of my container, this also adjusts automatically the height that each column takes up. But like I said, we can also align those columns independent from each other. So for example, the first column, I can say I want to stretch this entire column, and all of the elements inside of my column I can align as well. So I can center them like this and like this. Maybe my second column, I could stretch it as well, but I can also just say I want to have this one centered. If I increase the height, it looks like this. If I align the items inside of it, it looks like this. I can stretch it as well. So many different options. Last column, I can maybe say I want to align this one at the very end. So align self, I would set to end. I can do it centered at the top and stretch it. And you can see just via a few clicks how easy it is to adjust my layout, just like that. Okay. But again, I'm just going to give a few simple examples here. There are so many different ways and so much more complex layouts that you can create here. But I think this hopefully serves as a good foundation on how to create different layouts using your containers, nesting your containers, and you can go even more down, like many more levels if you want to, but yeah, I'm just not going to cover this in this tutorial. One thing I want to quickly show you is the ability to work with the container layout builder. So previously we always clicked on this container element here, then sometimes we added some containers using this plus icon here, or we use the drag and drop. Right now I want to show you another option, which is the content layout builder. So if we click on this little icon here, layout, okay, it brings up this pop-up. And if you already have a good idea on the layout that you want to build, maybe your entire page layout is already in your head, you could just wipe up probably the entire layout just by using this pop-up here. So if you already know you want to have a full width section, I would set this to stretch. I know I want to have a column layout, so we just set the direction to horizontal. And I know I want to have 4 containers inside of it, and each of these inner containers should have a padding of 20 pixels. I can set it here. I can click insert, and you can now see I have my full width container and my 4 columns inside of it. And each column has a padding of 20 pixels. This padding and this margin setting also did not set individually on each column now, because that way if you want to adjust the padding, you would have to adjust it one by one, that they all end up with the same amount of padding. This inner padding and inner margin is a setting that is available here on our main container. So if I go to styles and layout, you can see I have this control group here called inner container. So which means this padding of 20 pixels is applied to those 4 containers. If I change this value, you can see if I increase it, it obviously changes the size here of each and every container inside of this main container. I can also remove it just like that. And yeah, this is basically how you can get started with containers.